The sun dipped low over the rolling hills of the Silver Creek Ranch, casting a golden glow across the sprawling pastures where Suzanne Pereira stood, her boots sinking slightly into the soft earth. She adjusted her wide-brimmed hat, shielding her eyes from the fading light as she watched the cattle graze lazily in the distance. This ranch had been her family's legacy for 3 generations, a place of hard work and harder memories. Her father's recent passing had left her as the sole caretaker, a responsibility that weighed heavily on her slender shoulders. She wasn't sure she was ready to carry the burden alone, but the land was in her blood, and she'd fight tooth and nail to keep it alive. Enter Chris Reid, the new ranch hand her father had hired just before his death. Chris was all broad shoulders and quiet confidence, with a smile that could melt the frost off a winter morning. He'd arrived 2 weeks ago, his duffel bag slung over one shoulder, his eyes carrying a story he hadn't yet shared. Suzanne had noticed the way he handled the horses with a gentle touch, his hands steady and sure, and she couldn't help but feel a spark of curiosity about the man who seemed to belong to this land as much as she did. Yet, there was Brand, the neighboring rancher with a reputation for charm and ambition, who'd been circling her like a hawk since her father's funeral. Brand's easy grin and polished words were tempting, promising a partnership that could save her struggling ranch. But something about his calculated offers made her heart hesitate. As the sun sank lower, Chris approached, his boots crunching on the gravel path. "Need a hand with the fence tonight?" he asked, his voice low and warm. Suzanne nodded, her gaze lingering on him a moment too long, unaware that Brand was watching from the hill, his jaw tight with something that wasn't quite jealousy but close enough to burn. The next morning, Suzanne woke to the scent of fresh coffee drifting from the ranch house kitchen. She found Chris there, pouring a steaming mug, his flannel shirt rolled up to reveal forearms tanned from days under the open sky. He offered her a cup, their fingers brushing briefly, sending a jolt through her that she quickly dismissed as exhaustion. They had work to do, calves to tag, fences to mend, and a looming bank deadline that threatened to snatch the ranch from her grasp. Chris didn't talk much, but his presence was steady, like the oak tree that stood sentinel by the barn. As they rode out to check the herd, he shared snippets of his pasta childhood on a small farm, a stint in the city that never felt right, and a longing to find a place to call home. Suzanne listened, her heart softening at his honesty, though she kept her own walls high. By midday, Brand arrived, his truck kicking up dust as he pulled into the driveway. He was all charm, offering to buy a chunk of her land to ease her debts, his eyes gleaming with something that felt more like strategy than sincerity. "You don't have to do this alone, Suze," he said, leaning close, his cologne sharp against the earthy air. She stepped back, her gaze flickering to Chris, who was watching from the corral, his expression unreadable. The tension between the three of them crackled like a storm on the horizon. That evening, as Suzanne and Chris repaired a broken gate under the stars, he spoke softly about the ranch's history, how her father had taught him the ropes in those final days. His words felt like a bridge between her past and an uncertain future, and when their hands brushed again, she didn't pull away. Brand's offer lingered in her mind, practical but cold, while Chris's quiet strength tugged at something deeper, something she wasn't ready to name. Days turned into weeks, and the rhythm of the ranch became a dance between Suzanne and Chris, their partnership growing with every shared task. They laughed over spilled feed buckets, swapped stories during long rides, and found comfort in the silence of early mornings. Suzanne began to notice the way Chris's eyes crinkled when he smiled, the way he seemed to anticipate her needs before she voiced them. But Brand was never far, his visits frequent, each one laced with promises of financial security. He'd linger by the porch, his words smooth as he painted a picture of a merged ranch, their futures intertwined. Suzanne felt the pressure mounting. Her father's debts were due in a month, and the bank's letters were relentless. One afternoon, as she and Chris worked to free a calf stuck in the mud, their hands caked in earth, he looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You're stronger than you think, Suzanne," he said, his voice steady. "This place up, it's worth fighting for." She wanted to believe him, but doubt gnawed at her. Brand's latest offer included a partnership that would let her keep part of the land, but it meant giving up control, something her father had always warned against. That night, Under a sky heavy with stars, Chris found her by the creek, her face etched with worry. He didn't push, just sat beside her, the quiet between them louder than words. She felt the pull of his presence, the warmth of his shoulder close to hers, and wondered if she was falling for the man who'd become her anchor. Brand's truck crumbled in the distance, a reminder of the choice she couldn't avoid much longer. The annual county fair brought a welcome distraction, the air thick with the scent of hay and fried dough. Suzanne and Chris worked the ranch's booth, selling homemade jams and showing off their prize heifer. The crowd buzzed around them, but Suzanne felt a bubble of ease with Chris, his laughter infectious as they competed in a roping contest. He won, tossing her a playful wink that sent her heart skittering. Brand was there too, his tailored jacket out of place among the dusty boots and plaid shirts. He pulled Suzanne aside, his tone serious as he pressed his case again, this time with a contract in hand. "This is your chance to save the ranch, Suze. Don't let pride get in the way," he said, his eyes searching hers. She felt trapped, the weight of his words clashing with the lightness she'd felt with Chris moments before. Later, as she and Chris shared a cotton candy under the twinkling fair lights, he sensed her unease. "You don't owe him anything," Chris said softly, his hand brushing hers. "This ranch is yours, and you'll find a way." His belief in her was a lifeline, but the contract in her pocket felt like a noose. That night, back at the ranch, she couldn't sleep, her mind torn between Brand's logic and Chris's faith. She wandered to the barn, finding Chris there, brushing down a horse. Without a word, he handed her a brush, and they worked side by side, the quiet rhythm soothing her frayed nerves. The moonlight caught his profile, and she felt a rush of something she couldn't deny, something that scared her as much as it thrilled her. The following week, a storm swept through Silver Creek, the kind that rattled windows and sent cattle huddling in the barns. Suzanne and Chris worked through the downpour, securing loose gates and herding strays to safety. Soaked to the bone, they laughed through chattering teeth, their camaraderie a warmth against the cold. Brand showed up mid-storm, his truck sliding in the mud, offering to help but clearly out of his element. He stayed just long enough to press his case again, his voice cutting through the rain. "You can't keep this up, Suzanne. Let me take the burden off." She brushed him off, her focus on the work and the man beside her who never flinched, no matter the weather. As the storm cleared, the ranch stood intact, a testament to their grit. That evening, by the fireplace, Chris draped a blanket over her shoulders, his touch lingering. "We did good today," he said, his eyes holding hers. She wanted to tell him how much his presence meant, how his belief in her was rewriting her fears, but the words stuck. Brand's contract sat on the kitchen table, a stark reminder of reality. Later, when Chris caught her staring at it, he didn't ask questions, just squeezed her hand and said, "You'll know what's right." The gesture was small but seismic, shaking loose feelings she'd buried under duty and grief. She realized she was falling for him, not just for his strength but for the way he saw her flaws, fears, and all. Brand's promises were a safety net, but Chris was her courage, and the choice was growing clearer, even as it terrified her. With the bank deadline looming, Suzanne's days were a blur of work and worry. Chris became her shadow, tackling chores with a quiet determination that made her heart ache with gratitude. They dried out at dawn, checking fences and planning for the next season, their conversations weaving between practicalities and dreams. He spoke of building a life somewhere like this, rooted in the land, and she caught herself imagining him here, with her, years from now. Brand's visits grew more insistent, his charm giving way to frustration as she delayed her decision. One afternoon, he cornered her by the barn, his tone sharp. "You're throwing away a future for a hard hand who will leave when the work dries up," he said, his words cutting deep. Suzanne's temper flared, defending Chris, but Brand's accusation planted a seed of doubt. Was Chris just passing through? That night, she found him by the fire pit, the flames casting shadows on his face. She asked about his plans, her voice trembling with the weight of the question. He looked at her, his eyes steady, and said, "I'm here as long as you want me, Suzanne. This place, it feels like home." The honesty in his voice dismantled her fears, and when he reached for her hand, she let him hold it, her heart racing with the realization that she loved him. Brand's offer was a practical choice, but Chris was her heart's choice. and the distinction was becoming impossible to ignore. The day before the bank deadline, Suzanne faced a reckoning. She sat at the kitchen table, the contract in front of her, its pages heavy with consequences. Brand arrived, his confidence unshaken, ready to finalize the deal. He spoke of expansion, of a future where she wouldn't have to fight so hard, but his words felt hollow against the memory of Chris's quiet support. She asked for one more day, and Brand left, his frustration palpable. That afternoon, Chris found her in the hayloft, her eyes red from unshed tears. He didn't push, just sat beside her, the silence a comfort. Finally, she spoke, pouring out her fears of losing the ranch, of failing her father, of trusting her heart. Chris listened, then took her hand, his voice low. "You're not alone in this, Suzanne. Whatever you choose, I'm with you." His words were a lifeline, and when he pulled her close, she let herself lean into him, their embrace a promise of something stronger than fear. That night, she made her decision, not out of desperation but clarity. She tore up Brand's contract, her hands steady, and called the bank to negotiate a payment plan, using the ranch's remaining assets as collateral. It was a risk, but it was hers to take. Chris was there when she hung up, his smile proud and warm, and she knew she'd chosen more than just the ranch as she'd chosen him. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of new beginnings. Suzanne and Chris worked side by side, their partnership now laced with a quiet intimacy that made the ranch feel alive again. The bank agreed to a restructured loan, giving her breathing room, and the community rallied, buying her gems and beef at the market, their support a reminder of her father's legacy. Brand stopped coming around, his interest fading when he realized Suzanne's heart was elsewhere. One evening, as the sun set over the ranch, Suzanne and Chris sat on the porch, a bottle of wine between them. He reached for her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her skin, and she felt a peace she hadn't known in years. "You think we can make this work?" she asked, her voice soft. He grinned, his eyes bright with certainty. "We already are." They talked late into the night, about the ranch, their dreams, and the life they were building together. The stars above seemed to wink in approval, and as Suzanne leaned against him, she knew this was more than a romancia. It was a homecoming, rooted in the land and the love they'd found. The ranch was hers, but so was Chris, and together, they were unstoppable, ready to face whatever the future held.